It's Ricky Rich with Black Primacy with a quick question. Have you downloaded the Black Primacy app yet? If you haven't, don't worry about it. I just wanted to remind you that it is the number one way to find Black owned businesses near you. Whether you're looking for food, fashion, or services, we've got you covered on this app. So download it now and start supporting Black owned businesses in your area today. All right. Link in the description.
According to a study by the National Humanities Center, by the start of the Civil War in 1860, there were more than 46,000 plantations or estates with at least 20 enslaved people functioning across the South. 46,000. There were roughly 3,000 plantations with more than 100 enslaved people. Today, hundreds of these sites remain as private homes, wedding venues, bed and breakfasts, and tourist attractions. Many of them romanticize or sanitize their version of history as a part of the antebellum South. There's only one plantation museum that exists today that focuses solely on the experiences and the stories of those who were enslaved. That is the Whitney Plantation. Since 1752, the Whitney Plantation has gone through a series of evolutions. It began as an indigo plantation where at least 20 enslaved people from West Africa were forced to produce indigo dyes. The estate later grew into a massive sugar plantation with over 100 enslaved people working the fields and carrying out physically demanding work. Even after the Civil War, even after the Emancipation Proclamation, many former slaves remained on the same plantations. With no money, no land, and the threat of violence from their former enslavers, many former slaves had no choice but to stay as sharecroppers. These systems that entrenched deep poverty left many descendants of enslaved people with few options. At the Whitney Plantation, some Black families labored on the land well into the 1950s and 60s. Today, the Whitney Plantation Museum is dedicated to telling the histories of the people who were enslaved there, to honoring the lives lost and the lives stolen. The museum honors the skill and culture of those who lived and labored and resisted against the systems that kept them from their true freedom. In the words of the executive director of the Whitney Plantation, the museum is, quote, in the long fight for justice, for truth, and for memory. Yet the Trump administration's focus on eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion from American life has been sweeping, targeting funding for government programs, for schools, for museums, for anything related to race, gender, or economic equality. The president threatened to cut funding for any school that maintained what he called discriminatory equity ideology. It's not even a thing. And his administration cut funding for multiple museums that focus on non-white American histories, particularly programs and museums that focus on Native American and Black history. Earlier this month, the Trump administration announced funding cuts to the Institute of Museum and Library Services that included 2 grants that were intended for the Whitney Plantation Museum. The agency said that the museum and the programs that the grants were meant to fund no longer aligned with the agency's priorities and did not serve the interest of the United States. Now, let's be very clear about something. Telling the full history of this country is absolutely in our best interest. And what is not in our interest is erasing Black American foundational history. Joining me now is Dr. Imani Perry, professor of African American Studies at Harvard University and best-selling author of multiple important books, including her most recent, Black in Blues, How a Color Tells the Story of My People, and Tracy Terrence Farrell, executive director of Insight Network Incorporated nonprofit foundation and author of Life on the Whitney Plantation, 100 Years After Slavery. Tracy, you are someone who literally wrote the book and has a deep and personal connection to the Whitney Plantation. You and your mother co-authored the book, Life on the Whitney Plantation. It tells your mother's story where she was born and raised on the Whitney Plantation. Can you tell us a little bit about her journey?
Sure. First of all, thank you all for having me on the show. I am such a fan of your forward-leaning special program, and it's an honor and pleasure to be here. With the book, my mother, Vernita Gillard, and I, we decided to write this history of our family that lived, worked, and some that tragically died in the harsh conditions of Whitney Plantation. First off, to commemorate their resilience and strength. And secondly, because the plantation was turned into a museum, we wanted to have that history documented at this plantation museum. It is very important to us because not only is it our family history, this is history that's happening now, not in the antebellum period. We're talking about my family that's not even one generation removed from a slave plantation and all they had endured living there and working there.
So, Dr. Perry, for so many people who are looking at this and thinking, well, slavery was a long time ago. Why are we still talking about this? Why does this have to be a part of the history that we learn? Can you connect the dots in such a way that impresses upon our audience members the significance of what it is to erase the history of foundational Black people in this country from the story of America?
Right. I mean, first of all, I'm so grateful to be with you, and also so grateful for the testimony that Tracy offered, because I think she actually explained precisely the point. We cannot actually understand the story of this nation without the story of Black Americans. History can potentially be a moral instrument. It can be something that allows us to look into the past, understand both the virtues and the vices that give us information about how we ought to conduct ourselves in the present moment. We know all of the wealth of the United States had some in the antebellum period was centrally connected to the unfree labor of Black people. On the Whitney plantation, part of what you see is not simply the impact of generations of exploitation and unfreedom, but you also see the incredible body of knowledge, of skill that was required of people who were enslaved. You can see, to go through indigo and sugar and rice, and it teaches about all of the different kinds of farming that took place there. And that really is the story of the country. And I'm afraid that part of what this administration is trying to do is not just erase parts of history, but actually to erase the very idea of history and knowledge in the service of mythology. And you have to wonder why they are so desperate to have a public that is not informed, that is not knowledgeable, and that can't actually figure out where we come from as a part of how we decide about where we ought to go in the future.
Tracy, you gave such a moving account of the reason why you and your mother were motivated to put this book together. When you meet people and you are having conversations, particularly within the context of what's going on today, what's the most important thing that you try to convey about her legacy and what it represents in terms of the larger story of Black Americans in this country?
Well, like Dr. Perry just mentioned, it's a historical device here that we have. I try to convey to people this tragic situation, as sad as it was, it also brings immense strength and pride in me and my family that we were able to persevere and be resilient in these harsh conditions, and at the same time, as a people, be able to contribute to a massive wealth, as Dr. Perry highlighted, a massive wealth brought to the economy of Louisiana and also in turn to our country.
And when you have these conversations, do you find, Tracy, that people are surprised? Do you find that people are ignorant to some of this information? What is the reaction when you tell the story, not just of your mother, but of the Whitney plantation as a whole?
Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head, sir. When I tell people about the situation or the history, they say, are you for certain your mom was in the antebellum period? I'm like, no, this is happening now in our generation. That's why the title is Life on Whitney Plantation, 100 Years After Slavery, which you can find at the whitneyplantation.org site. But yes, they're shocked. I even had one younger cousin at a university in a seminar, one of his classes, they talked about plantation life. And he said, oh yeah, my grandmother lived on that plantation. And the college professor, the students, they said, are you sure? The same thing I get. Are you sure we're talking about the antebellum period? He's like, no, she was one of the last of the families to live on this plantation this day and age. So people are shocked to hear that, or shocked to hear that my grandmother, who was one of my best friends, watched her mother die in child labor while giving birth in those impoverished conditions on that plantation. Yes, this is stuff that was happening this day and age. And usually I tell them, you see some narratives of what occurred, all of the dastardly mistreatment of enslaved people during the plantation life, but you don't read about sometimes what were the ramifications of that on their descendants. So I aimed, and my mother aimed, to capture that in this book.
Picking up on that very point, Dr. Perry, what Tracy talked about in terms of the ramifications of descendants, is something that really strikes to me as the crux of the matter. In order to understand structurally how these things have had an impact on things like economic inequality, generational poverty, and other sort of constraints, even environmental racism, for example, when you don't tell these anecdotes and connect them to these systems, people are not able to understand the lingering impact and effect. But in your opinion, when you see these attacks, is that partially the point or the intent of why there's such an effort to erase this history?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is when we talk about Louisiana, we're talking about Cancer Alley. When you have a history of devaluing people, one of the consequences is that then all of the suffering in our society is distributed in ways that allow various kinds of injustice to accumulate in certain populations. So absolutely, there is a discourse that implies that the efforts to address the history and ongoing impact of racial inequality is somehow racist in and of itself, which is just, beyond wrong. It's horrifying to suggest that when you have generations of people who at first have their labor, the value of their labor go to others, and then for generations after to be exploited, and then literally within, I'm 52 years old. It's within my lifetime that is the first steps that we're moving towards addressing generations of that kind of inequality, generations of that injustice, and that now people are suggesting that somehow that effort to address that inequality is unfair. It's horrifying, and we also continue to see the lingering impact, and in some instances, it's an echoing and it's a vast impact of generations of inequality on health outcomes, on education outcomes, on opportunities of various sorts. So yes, they are absolutely trying to distract from that fact, but also trying to teach a false narrative about what this country is and has done, so that people will be completely confused, both inside and outside our community. So I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation, because it has a large potential impact.
A large potential impact indeed, perhaps one of the most important conversations that we will have all day, if not for longer. Thank you both, Dr. Imani Perry and Tracy Terrence-Farrell, for being here.
All right, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please check out the other content that we have on this channel. But before you go, I wanted to remind you again not to forget to check out the Black Primacy app. It is the best way to connect with Black-owned businesses near you. They need your support. We need your support. Link in the description.